Thanks for tuning in to Healthy Planet One, where we discuss healthy living from experts in each of their fields. This is your host, Patricia Starr.
And your co-host, Kimberly Knock.
Hello and welcome, everyone, to Healthy Planet One. We're delighted today to have Micaela Matthews with us, and we'll be speaking about taking your power back authentically. Hello, Micaela. Nice to have you with us today.
Hi, Patricia. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. We're Kimberly and are happy to have you because we've been on this radio show for probably, Kimberly, I think it's been like since April. Hello?
2 years, February.
2 years, yeah. But I think we've been talking about the C word since April for sure. So that's what I was referring to. But let's get into now. I know, Micaela, you were born in Ohio, and you worked in Washington D.C. for over 30 years as a project manager. I know one of the things that we were talking about, you've had many different private and nonprofit enterprises that you've worked with and federal programs. And pretty much you've been a conduit or a bridge between technology and people. And as we enter into this age of this fourth industrial revolution, I just thought it would be really interesting to have you on and talk about what your experience has been in resolving conflict, working out situations, and also discovering the processes that you've had to work with when you've worked with the FCC and public companies, how they worked with complaints and what you have found. Did I give a good presentation like that about you?
It's great. Yes, I did work on a number of projects and programs mixed in with private, nonprofit, and several that were federal programs, and so I've kind of been in data and on a lot of programs where we were auditing data and looking at unfortunately fraud within data. So I've kind of had a little bit of sleuthing around in data for a number of years of my professional life. So I would say that for me, I want the facts. I want the source information, and that I will use to set with me and guide me on the right journey and information to share with others. Something that is that I've just kind of come to the conclusion that there's this struggle between belief and knowing, and a statement that really sits with me is belief is the enemy of knowing.
Belief is the enemy of knowing?
Yes.
Say more about that.
Well, belief, and this year that we've just come through, I think really demonstrates that when you believe in something, it means you've put your trust into that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you know with all your being that is authentic, that is true, that is that information has been tested. So this past year really showed me that in a personal way, not doing this in a professional way for a living, that in order for somebody to truly know what is true for them, you must use your own abilities to validate data and information, whatever a narrative might be. You need to use what God-given abilities you have, and we all have them. They're all different. That's what makes us wonderful community to work together.
Right.
And once you do that, once you sit with information and you use your own abilities to validate it, it becomes your truth. It's no longer a belief where you're advocating it, what's true for you over to somebody else. So that was a really big takeaway for me from 2020.
Well, one thing that really impressed me when we were talking was, in the work that you've done in the past, whether you liked it or hated it, it didn't matter. The fact is that what you shared was the fact that your responsibility was to find where there was discrepancies, which could also be known as fraudulent, right? If I'm not mistaken. And so in having to, when we sign a contract all the time. We have a contract with our iPhone, we have a contract with our computer, we have a contract with, our electric company, etc. Do we know exactly what we've signed up for, and is it true? And that was part of the work that you did for those 30 years, right?
Yeah, particularly when, in any job, but certainly far more when you're working on a federal program. There's a whole compliance element to it. And so, you're ferreting through all this data, making sure that the information that has been submitted is in compliance with the rules that allow us to fund these applications. So, or provide the funding for whatever public program that it may have been. So, yeah,
and that can be really pretty tedious to try to ferret it all out. But you mentioned something that was really interesting, and that was you had an intuitive feeling.
I do.
And say a little bit, because I think that's because everybody has that, but we don't trust that, right?
We don't. It's definitely, I would say, what I learned, particularly working on one of the federal programs that I worked on. It surprised me that I didn't necessarily read something in the documentation that said, oh, that's fraudulent. It was this innate knowing that as I was reviewing through, and sometimes I was looking through hundreds, over thousands of pages of documentation for one application. And sometimes just going through that information, I was getting this internal sense that something was off. Something wasn't right. It's not because I read some word on my screen or in the paper if I had printed it out. It was, I knew something wasn't right. And eventually, as I dug through and went through my review process, I always confirmed that there was some sort of fraud. And that really struck me that was my innate knowing that it's there's something here. And so I've always let that guide me to validate things.
I think you're saying that we all have that, but you had the opportunity to really put that into practice. And you were, as you were saying, in 2020, there's a lot that came up that had you go, wait a minute, right? What's going on here?
Yeah. Things just didn't really add up. I immediately, didn't really take much from the mainstream media, which I don't really consume that content anyway. But, the first time in my life, we're heading into a pandemic. So, okay, let me, kind of listen to what is being said. But I immediately was just barraged by fear. And going into my professional life, I was taken back to something that I had recalled that was really important for a pivotal moment in my life. Was I read a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways by Susan Jeffers.
Uh-huh.
And that book, I reflected back on that, and I still remember the cover, and it lays the groundwork for you can't be paralyzed by fear. You can't wait for the fear to go away before you act and you do something. And so as fearful as it may have seemed, I knew that I needed to just keep looking through the information and do what I could to be prepared and help those around me to be prepared. So it brought all of that discernment up for me very early.
And you began to look at what's the truth of this global situation. What are they saying? What are the numbers, right?
Right. So I started to notice that, in reading the public health sites and looking at the numbers that were coming out, I was finding that what was being said as far as the number of cases or the number of hospitalizations, the numbers weren't matching what I was finding in the data, and they weren't matching what we normally did, what we did before this pandemic, what hospitals and things were told to do. That guideline changed, and I was reading these news alerts that were coming out on the public health sites and seeing that the criteria for making these determinations was not necessarily based on any testing. It was sometimes just based on symptoms. And then as the testing rolled out, I dug through that and saw that there was so much ambiguity in whether it was rapid testing or serology testing. There was massive swings in what the protocols were. And I thought, well, gosh, this is very interesting. And then they still relied on, well, even if the test came back negative, it should still be counted as a positive. And I just thought, this doesn't make any sense. What on earth is going on? And
did this take you back to the work that you had done with federal programs and going, wait a minute, these things aren't coming together, they're not adding up. Gee, I remember these kinds of things, my intuition is kicking in, what's going on, right? So
yeah.
I want to go back to, the difference between belief and true information. And that's what you were hitting up against with this whole data evaluation, right?
Right, yeah, definitely hitting that same kind of internal feeling that something's not right here, and then just checking in occasionally to what media was saying and hearing such contrived messaging that doesn't match the actual data. And I thought, well, what is going on? This is here's the source data. This is what we should be talking about.
Yeah, and there was a question of integrity, right, in terms of what you're looking at. So a question that comes up for me, and I love it that you talk about 2020 is really about our 2020 vision, like that's clear vision. How I mean, with all the stuff that's going on media-wise and what have you, how do people ferret out the information? How do they rely on their intuition and listen to what's really true versus their belief?
I think the most important thing that I can tell somebody that wants to truly know the truth and their truth is the first thing that you have to do is question everything and be curious.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a sense of curiosity, don't immediately discount whether it's a headline or just one person's interpretation of what they're reading. Hear what they're saying and go to the source documentation that they have referenced and ferret that out. Like I had said in the beginning, use your own abilities, and the more you do that, the more you will develop that discernment. You have to keep an open mind.
Yeah, it's an exercise, right?
Yes, and you have to lose preconceived thoughts. I think if I would say 2020 is a complete pivot in the way we think, the way we process information. Everybody should have been faced with a number of challenges, not just because of the pandemic, but I mean the complete change in how you go to work, how you work, how the kids go to school, all of these things. So having preconceptions about how things work should all just be put aside because we're no longer in that environment. you must have evidence or source documentation to back that up.